This is Debt Free in 30, where every week we take 30 minutes and get practical advice from industry experts about personal finance and living debt-free. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
If you are one of the lucky ones who gets a year-end bonus at work, what should you do with it? Or what if you get a large cash gift for the holidays or a tax refund in the spring? What should you do when you receive a big lump sum of money? Now, of course, this show is called Debt Free in 30 because my guest and I discuss strategies to get out of debt. So the obvious answer to the question is, well, if you get some extra money, use it to pay off debt. Sounds like an obvious answer, but it's not quite that simple. There may be some tax consequences if you get a bonus from your employer, so you may not be able to use all of that money to pay off debt. And if you have more than one debt, which one should you pay off first? And what if you've already gone bankrupt and then you get a bonus? How does that work? Lots of questions. So to discuss it, I'm here in the Hoyes Michaelis office in downtown Toronto at the corner of Yonge and Bloor. And I'm joined by our manager of consumer insolvency, Scott Terrio. Scott, ready to talk money and debt?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, so let's start with the hypothetical questions here. So one of our listeners calls you up and he says, hey, good news. I got a year-end bonus, but I've also got some debt. So what's your thought process on how to deal with that? What's the first thing to think about?
Right. I think you and I have met with enough people over the years to know that this kind of thing actually happens. I think I just dropped my phone. Sorry about that. Great start. This thing actually, this kind of thing happens, and it's not necessarily always a Christmas bonus, but it's something that falls into money. So I think one of the things that people don't do is pause and reflect on, okay, what should I be doing with what's the maximum I can make of this sum of money. So consider your options. Think about what you've got and what you need to address in some kind of priority, and then make a plan with it. Because oftentimes we'll see people make mistakes by doing something, impulsively, and oftentimes too, that kind of stuff can't be undone very easily.
Yeah, I got some money, so I'm going to pay off that guy.
Yeah,
because he's the one who's been calling me a lot.
Or the amount of money I just got matches that exact debt. Right. Wouldn't it be nice to just clean that one out?
Yeah,
not necessarily always the best thing you can do.
Yeah, and I'd like to talk about how you figure out which one. Mm-hmm. So the first thing that occurs to me then, of course, I'm a chartered accountant, a CPA. So someone says, I got a bonus. And the first thing I'm thinking about is, oh, well, you're going to get hit with taxes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so just because the boss says you're getting a $5,000 bonus doesn't mean you're going to have $5,000 in your pocket at the end of the day. Yeah. So how does that work? Tell me a bit about taxes then when you're getting a bonus.
So if you do get a bonus, and let's use the Christmas bonus as a good example because that's maybe the most common one. It's usually not always the same amount, first of all, because it's based on whatever, performances, whatever. So it might not be exactly the same every year, and you're getting paid gross before tax. So you don't want to be spending gross because there's always tax to come later. So, your employer tends to know what your regular salary is, whether annual, monthly, and they're taking off appropriate tax. But then the bonus, if it's significant enough, could kick you up into another tax bracket, which means later on you're actually going to be end up paying more tax on your overall income. So very important to, as you said, understand what you're actually going to end up with net, because you don't want to be spending money that isn't yours.
Yeah, and you hit the nail on the head there. It may kick you up into a higher tax bracket. Yeah. So all year long, you're making X number of dollars, and that puts you in the 30% tax bracket. So you've been paying 30% all year long. Yep. And then at the end of the year, boom, you get this other chunk. Well, that means, and maybe they do it right. They say, oh, that's a lot of money. We're going to take 50% off for tax. Yeah. So you, but what it also means is all the money you've made all year should have been taxed at 35%, not 30%. Yeah.
So even though they were doing it right before, that extra amount now means that it's subject to a higher bracket, regardless of whether they were doing it right before.
Yeah, which is a huge problem, and we see that all the time here. Mm-hmm. And so you got to do the math to make sure. You might say, okay, a $5,000 bonus, they gave me $2,500. I know I get to keep that. Well, no, you might still have another $500 or $600 in taxes owing. So that's a problem. Okay, so do the math so you know exactly what you get to keep. Now, what then do I do with the money? Right. So I've got all this, whether it's a lot of money or a little money. what's the first thing I should be thinking of paying? What's second? Like, you give us the order of priority here.
Right. And we've put together kind of a generic list of priorities here. It may not apply to everybody, but, it's something to go through and say, okay, because oftentimes people are also under stress when they've got debt, so they're not really thinking of everything clearly.
Pretty much all the time.
Right. And so, first of all, anything that's overdue. I mean, if your hydro is about to get cut off, you want to get that.
That might be a good thing to pay,
right? Like immediate utilities where it's something you can't function without and you're behind. That's got to be the priority. Second would be anything to do with high interest debt, and this is kind of projected math. So people sit down and they say, okay, what's my most high interest debt here? Well, if you're paying 27% on a retail credit card, or if you've missed a payment on a 20% credit card, well, you're already paying 27 now because you missed a payment and they bumped you up. Over time, that's going to cost you a lot of money that you don't notice, And so, putting a chunk down on that kind of thing will actually save you money down the road, but you might not feel it right now. And so it's future money that you're protecting by doing that.
Yeah, and it's not hard to figure out the math. If you've got a $100 debt, if it's at 27% interest, you're paying $27 a year. If it's 10%, you're paying 10.
Yep.
So by paying down the 100, I'm saving 27 as compared to the other. So put all your debts in order of the interest rate.
Right.
And start by attacking the highest interest rate
Right,
ones.
and don't necessarily get lured into paying one off just because it's the amount that can be cleared, right? Because, again, if you paid $10,000 of $20,000 at super high interest and you leave the $1,000 or $2,000 sitting over here, you're actually doing better for yourself, even though you haven't cleared a debt off.
Yep.
And people like to clear debts, but that's not always the best thing to do.
Well,
right?
and we see that all the time.
Yeah.
It's psychologically, I only owe $500 to that one. Let's get rid of it. Yeah,
Yeah.
but that one's only a smaller
that
interest
didn't do
rate.
you as much good.
Yeah,
even though
maybe
it felt
psychologically
good.
it felt better, but
Yeah.
from a math point, it didn't
Exactly.
make sense.
Yep.
So I start with whatever's overdue. That if they're going to shut my hydro off, that's probably the number one priority. And then I would go to my high interest debt. So let's say that all of my debts are relatively the same interest rate. So what would be the next thing I would think about?
Okay, so what we'd call callable or secured debt. So secured debt, of course, is car loans, mortgages, anything where there's an asset tied to the debt, where the lender has recourse by seizing that asset if you don't pay. And so the lender's always going to be able to pay itself by doing that. So, but what you want to do is you want to make sure that you are you're paying down those debts as quickly as you can, because that asset's not yours. If the what hits the fan, that car that you've been working to pay down for years now, if you have trouble making payments and you miss 2 or 3 or whatever that lender is kind of sensitive to, you're going to lose that asset. So in other words, you're trying to pay more so that the asset is owned instead of owed.
Yeah, and that's counterintuitive to a lot of people, because they're sitting there going, okay, wait a minute. My car loan is at 3% interest.
Yeah.
So why would I even consider, or my mortgage, which is the lowest interest, why would I even consider prepaying that?
Yep.
And you hit the nail on the head again. If you get behind on your car payment, they can take your car.
Right. No matter how much you've paid up till then.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. They can take your car.
For 3 years and too bad.
Too bad.
Yep.
You lose it. So yes, we understand it's probably the lowest interest rate you've got, which is what a car loan or a mortgage is compared to a credit card. But if you don't pay, there's a big risk that they can take it. So how much trouble would you be in if you lost your car or your house?
You're protecting an asset essentially, right?
So now again, we said at the beginning, this is an order to think about. In your case, you may say, well, no, I'm going to prioritize these things differently. But now you talked about...
It's just that's something people don't usually think about.
Right.
So they're trying to bring that out into the open. And this is the discussions that you and I have with clients, which people can't see.
Yeah.
We talk about that kind of stuff, right? We just say, okay, are you aware that this is a possibility? It may not apply. You may not care. I don't care if they take my car if I miss. Okay, fine. But at least know about it, right?
You've thought about it.
Yeah.
Now, we talked about both callable and secured. So secured, we understand what that is. It's where something is attached to the loan, so a car loan, a mortgage. Callable, what does callable mean?
Callable means the terms or the rules around that debt, like a line of credit, the bank can move the goalposts at any time, basically. So like an unsecured line of credit. most people don't quite realize that, you know, that's open to whatever the whims of the bank are. Now, it doesn't mean the banks are going to go, you know, and ask you for the whole amount, but it means they could change the percentage, they could change the payment terms, they could change the limits, right? And so that kind of stuff, you're subject to a lot of things that aren't in your control.
Yeah, and that's an excellent way to describe it. They can change the goalposts.
Yep.
And we see that all the time, particularly, I mean, we're recording this at the end of 2018. I think we'll be seeing this a lot in 2019 as well.
This discussion will be up next year again.
Well, I mean, I had a guy a couple of weeks ago who said, yeah, my line of credit was 5%, and now all of a sudden it's 10%.
How can they do that?
How can they do that?
I know.
Well, because it's not a fixed term loan. If you have a mortgage where the rate is locked in for 5 years, then the rate doesn't change for 5 years. Car loan doesn't change.
The bank's not going to change the rules if they can't.
Right.
Like, I can assure you their lawyers have checked this out.
They can do it. And
you know, to say how can they do that? Well, it's on page 4.
Yeah, they do it. They do it. And so your line of credit, you're humming along, it's only 5%, it's great, and then all of a sudden it's 10%, your payments have doubled. So by chipping away at your callable debt, or as you call it, the move the goalpost debt, that's certainly a good thing to protect yourself for the future. So, okay, what would be the next thing then? I mean, I guess we've kind of hit on it with respect to secured debt then.
Right. So I think we attack one of the biggest issues around personal finance in Canada, which is setting aside an emergency fund or savings. You know, from all the stats that I hear and read, there aren't many people who in Canada who have a good substantial amount of money set aside just in case. And I think part of that is the debt culture, right? It is, okay, well, I can just always put this on my line of credit or my Visa if I need to take the dog to the vet. I had a $3,100 vet bill, you know, not me, one of my clients last week. And you know, the guy said, well, I was going to come in and sign and I can't now because I got this. So now that would have been nice to have money, but of course he's past that. And so I think, you know, if you've done all those other things first, you're in a good position now to maybe open a separate account and just, you know, you direct X amount of dollars off your pay every time in there. You don't notice it doesn't hurt as much. Yeah.
So when you look at this priority, then, so you start with the overdue stuff, then the high interest rate debt, then the callable debt, the secured debt, then you start making extra payments on your secured debt, your mortgages. If you can't pay them off, well, make an extra payment on your car loan. Yeah. Once you're debt free, then that's when you start building up for the emergency fund.
Yeah.
It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me if you're paying 27% on a credit card to be putting money in a savings account
and getting 3
or 0
or 2 or 1.
Yeah, and then paying tax on it. I mean, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
I saw the other day the high interest savings account, it was 3%.
Yeah, that's high interest. So they're borrowing it from you at 3% and loaning it out at 20. Right. So okay, you set aside your emergency fund. So my debts are paid off. I've got a chunk of money sitting there. Yep. Then I guess, so what comes next from there?
Look to the future maybe. So like if you have kids in RESP, right? So, you know, take advantage of the government grant portions of those things, you know, pretty significant over time, and start it as soon as you can. So, you know, when I meet with couples and they have young kids and they have all this debt, well, okay, we're going to do a proposal, get rid of the debt, and then you're going to get an RESP underway because you're going to run out of time at some point for that to be as much as it can be for when the kid goes to school. TFSA, similar thing. I mean, you can do a lot of things inside of a TFSA. You know, you can have RSPs, mutual funds, whatever you want, way you want it structured. But now you're at a point where you're looking down the road. So you do your immediates, immediates, hydro, and then you do your interest rate. Okay, which ones are the worst? Get rid of those first. And so we're moving along in terms of stress level, or you know, because you're at this point now where you're saving for the future. You're in a better spot, right?
Right. Yeah, you're going down the line, and a TFSA can also be used for your emergency fund.
Sure can.
I mean, because
it's a bank account.
Yeah, and with a TFSA, you don't want to be putting money in and out, because you're using up your contribution room, which gets restored the next year. We don't want to get into all the details, but if you want to put money somewhere that it's a little harder to get at, then a TFSA would be a good thing. And an RESP, Registered Educational Savings Plan, you're exactly right. You can only contribute to them up to a certain age. I think it's by the time they turn 16. So if you want to take advantage of those government grants, you got to do it. You got to do it earlier. So then, okay, I've taken care of education and things like that. The next thing, I guess, would be thinking about retirement.
Yeah, so look further down the road. So the kid's gone to school, whatever, you're going to work forever, but you're going to retire at some point, hopefully. So now you're looking at, you know, RRSPs and LIRAs and that kind of thing. So a lot more time to your advantage with those things. But again, now we're at that point, right? So, okay, we've taken care of the immediate problems, the debts with high interest. We're paid down the car loan so that it's ours or whatever. You're setting aside an emergency. You got a few bucks just in case, like they always say, a month or two worth of living expenses. So I don't know, 5,000-6,000, something like that. RESPs, education, that kind of thing. What's the retirement plan? So if you don't already have one, well, you probably should be sitting down with somebody and looking at that. Like, what age are you? Are you 35? Okay, well, then you've got, 30 years plus? That's the more years you've got, the better for that kind of thing. So don't wait. But again, we're blocking and tackling here, right? You're not in a position to do that unless you've done those other things first, really. Because at some point, if you've got all kinds of high interest debt, that's eating away in the background. You want that out of the way first before you're looking at this kind of stuff, right?
So the retirement would be almost the final step, and then I guess the final step is, okay, if you've got your retirement fully funded, then you're just into general investing. Then
just make yourself some money now, because you've got. I mean, your retirement fund can be part of that as well. So the last two can kind of be combined, because most people will either have a fund manager who's, the RSP, the LIRA is essentially they're trading stuff in the background, or someone is for them. But at that point, if you've done all those other things, make yourself some money if you're able to do that, if you've learned how to do that kind of thing, right? So, but again, it's priorities. I have people who are doing those last two things now, and really they're at step one, maybe not step one with the hydro being cut off, but step two for sure, right? And so it's like, well, do you know what you're doing here?
It's deal with those debts first. So okay, so I understand the general thought process. Then you deal with the most urgent debts, then the highest interest rates debts. You work through your debts, and then you start saving. So of course, this is the portion of the show where I plug my book. We got to do it every show. Straight Talk on Your Money. Myth number 8, starting on page 79, is that you should pay your small debts first, because, as you alluded to earlier, that kind of gives you a bit of a psychological boost in eliminating debt. Now, I called it a myth, meaning I don't agree. I don't think you should pay your small debts first. I don't think it's a good idea.
Yep.
What do you think?
Well, it does make some people feel better, and I think it gets down to what kind of person you are. I mean, if one of them makes you feel good, fine, that's great. I suppose some people don't want to pay multiple bills, and frankly, you and I benefit from that to a certain extent, because a proposal is one payment, and all of your problems are handled in one payment per month. If you're not doing a proposal, sometimes it's better to have multiple things you're paying, as long as you're saving a bunch of money that you wouldn't otherwise notice. So yes, okay, you don't want to pay 5 or 6 things a month, because it always feels like somebody's on your back.
Yeah.
But I've had people where, if that suits them better, knock yourself out.
Yeah, I mean,
right?
the reason I put that in the book is math.
Yeah.
And you already hit it, that your priority should be to pay the high interest rate debts first, because it's going to save you the most money.
Right.
Then you want to start attacking things like callable debts or lines of credit, where they can just bump the interest rate on you. You got a lot more security. But I get it. And I guess I would come down on the side that, okay, if it's a $200 cell phone bill, just pay it off. It's okay, you'd save more money by putting the $200 against something else, but it's not a huge enough number to worry about. So if it's a really tiny little thing, fine. But otherwise, it's mathematically you are going to save more money by chopping away at the high interest rate.
And if you're paying the high interest ones, like, it's, you got to keep doing that, right? You can't just pay it and pay it and think, okay, well, I've still got all these debts that I'm paying all the time. Well, but you need to set yourself up on some kind of a plan, because that is paying off, even though you might not notice it. You're preventing yourself from paying 25% on debt down the road.
Yep.
That's a lot.
It's huge.
It's a huge amount of interest, right? So it's discipline, right? So ignore the little debts maybe, and just keep with the plan, right?
Yeah, but you're right. You got to understand how your brain works, and I get
it's a tough one to get around.
It is, and so again, we're giving our advice on how we would handle it, but you can make your own decisions to do it the way you want. Okay, so we're talking about cases where I've got all this money, I pay things off, I start investing. But the typical people we're meeting with, of course, they do not have enough to pay off their debt. Right. So, if you get a $10,000 bonus, but you have, if you have $10,000 in debt, great, you pay off your debt, you're good. But what do you do if you get a $10,000 bonus and you've got $50,000 worth of debt? Then what?
Right. So then, if I have someone in my office, what we're talking about at that point is what's called either a lump sum or a partial lump sum proposal, because you're trying to make that $10,000 go as far as you can, right? So in normal circumstances, you can't with creditors. As long as you can go to your creditors one by one on your own privately and say, I got 10,000. How about I make a deal with all of you? That's not very realistic for most people because you're dealing with separate banks. They all have to say yes. They're all going to ask you for different things. They can change their mind later, like it's not legally binding.
And so what you're talking about is an informal proposal where I call them up and say, so in that scenario,
Here's
I've
my
got
10 grand.
Yeah, I've got 5 different debts, each of $10,000, but I've only got $10,000.
Right.
So yeah, in theory, you could call each of them up and say, look, here's a couple of $1,000.
Right.
Take it or leave it.
Yeah.
And if you're a year and a half behind on your payments, you haven't made payments in a year and a half, they may actually accept that.
Yeah.
But if you're relatively current, you're only a month or two behind. Well, there's no way they're going to say, "Fine, we'll take $2,000 to pay off 10."
Like the bank wants you to keep doing what you're doing forever. That's
they don't want you to pay it off.
No,
they want you to keep
and
making
there's nothing wrong
payments.
with that. That they lend money to make money. That's the business they're in. So there's no incentive for them to say yes to that. And so that's why we have a lot of people who go and okay, I'll go do that. Well, if you can do it, great. I've seen very little success for anyone even trying that kind of stuff. Even through, a lawyer, it's hard to get that stuff done just because the bank goes, well, here's what you signed, pay it.
Yeah,
right?
it works in very specific circumstances. The debts are old, maybe a year and a half old. Maybe you're self-employed. You don't have any assets, so the bank can't be garnishing your wages or doing anything.
Or maybe the bank has offered it. Right? Sometimes they'll send you a letter saying, hey, here's an offer to clear your debts. I mean, that happens.
Yeah.
But we're talking about with people who have 50,000 and 10 of it is here, 10 of it is here, 10 of it is here, 10. It's not even the same creditor.
It's very difficult.
That's tough to manage for somebody privately.
So, okay, now you mentioned the term lump sum consumer proposal.
Yeah.
So let's break this down. So a consumer proposal, and I think, listeners to this show have a pretty good idea what that is, but, it's a deal.
Yeah. And almost all proposals that we file and other trustees file are just strictly, X number of months because that's what people can handle. They don't have 10,000. If you're lucky enough to have access to this kind of money, and again, you have 50,000 in debt, but you can still make that work because a lot of times what we'll say is either offer them 10, take it or leave it, and no payment plan. And sometimes it depends who the mix of creditors are and your circumstances and whatever, they might take that.
And that's what a lump sum proposal is.
Just what it says. You give them a one-time payment, your proposal's finished. A partial lump sum can also be clever because if you give them, say, 5,000 and you want to keep 5 or you want to, whatever, and then you make a payment plan with them for the rest. So proposal can be 5 years. So usually what we'll say is, here's 5,000 now, to assuage you and to sometimes the creditors will take that because they've gotten a lot up front and they don't have to wait as long to get paid out the whole thing. So so that's attractive to creditors, and it's also attractive to people who don't necessarily want to give the whole 10 because they finally have some money.
Yeah.
Right? And so, okay, the creditor knows you got the other 5, but as long as you've given them a chunk of money, it's kind of good faith. That works, actually. And sometimes creditors will take less because of this because they're not waiting as long. So in other words, if you had just walked in with no $10,000 bonus and was just doing a cash flow proposal, so month by month proposal, $200-$300, whatever, for 5 years. If you have that 10, the creditors might say, well, normally we'd take 20,000 as the total payout because we're waiting 5 years. But if you're going to give me 10 right now and I can just write this off, they might actually do that. We've seen that.
Yep. And what we're giving you is examples because every situation is different. There are some banks who say, no, all we care about is the absolute dollar value. Yeah. So whether you give us 20,000 over 5 years or 20,000 today, it doesn't matter to us. There's no, time value of money because we're a bank. All our money is,
right. And because we do lots of these, we will know by your mix of creditors usually, okay, if you got 10,000, you got this mix, they'll do it. These guys, they won't touch it.
Yep.
So that's part of experience.
And there's no reason you can't start by saying, okay, I've got $10,000. Here you go. That's the deal. They may come back and want more. Okay, so it'll be $10,000 plus I'll also kick in $100 a month for the next 5 years or something like that.
You start somewhere, right? Because essentially, proposal allows you to kind of dip your toe in the water, right? And say, okay, well, I'm not sure what they're going to say, but here's an offer, and they come back and they say, we'd also like a little bit. We talk, we figure it out and
come
we
out
see
with
what
it.
Works for you.
Yeah, and our approach is to offer a reasonable proposal right to begin with. We're not going in lowballing with some silly thing, but sometimes the creditors will come back and want a few extra bucks. Well, that may end up being how it works. Okay, so you are the guy who goes on Twitter all the time and tells stories. Yep. Often in the evening. So if you're on Twitter in the evening, you can story time with Scott.
Yeah.
And a lot of the stories you're telling, that's what we're going to brand it. There you go. Story time with Scott. And a lot of the stories are, here's what happens if you make the wrong decision, which, frankly, what my whole book is about too. So what are the kind of mistakes that you see people making? Because if we can show people what the mistakes are in advance when it comes to, paying down debt, then perhaps they can avoid them. And
we're talking about when you have a lump sum here, right? So okay, so if you fall into a sum of money, let's use the $10,000 again. Usually what I see people do is they'll pay, like they don't have a plan for it. So they'll just impulsively pay one. This one matches 10. I can completely eliminate that entire credit card with just a payment. The next mistake they make is not cutting that card up, of course, and then of course the card sits there all tempting and 10,000 clear on it as a limit, and so they end up, they run into circumstances they run the balance up again. So that's a kind of a double problem. A splurge. I mean, they've been under debt pressure for 3 or 4 years. Maybe they haven't been working or something. Wouldn't it be nice to just buy myself something? I've seen people go on vacation when they owe $60,000 in credit card debts. Not advisable, but understandable.
Totally
right?
understandable.
Like people are,
it's been a year or two. I lost my job.
Not live
I'm now
forever,
back working,
right? You know what I mean?
Finally, it's Christmas. I want to buy some stuff for my kids. Whatever.
I mean, like your book says that too. I mean, this is emotional, right?
What's the name of the book?
I can't remember.
You forgot the name. Okay, we'll look it up.
Straight Talk on Your Money.
There you go. Perfect.
Yes, I'm looking at the back.
There you go.
So, but that's the kind of thing you address in there, and that's when you meet with as many people as we have, you see it, right? It's people aren't necessarily rational with what they do. So, the trouble is once you've done something, again, it's hard to undo things when you finally make a plan with someone like us, and you say, okay, well, you paid that one. The rest of the creditors might not be too happy about that, right? So there are ramifications to this. And making a big purchase, we talked about.
Yeah, I finally got enough money to get a car.
Yeah.
So let's.
Did you need a car?
Yeah.
So they get a car, great. So, if you got $50,000 in credit card debt, now you're paying for the car as well.
Yeah, because the $10,000 bonus you got isn't enough to buy the car, but it's a good down payment on the car.
Now you're financing.
You've actually got even more debt.
Right.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
It's even worse.
So, and that might be okay, but again, if you sat down with somebody beforehand, you'd look and see, okay, what is the smart thing to do here? Using the down payment as on a big purchase like a house or something, financing the rest, and then also expecting that the money will go longer than you thought. 10,000 sounds like a great, huge amount of money when you haven't had any for 2 or 3 years, right? You're just living month to month for 2-3 years. You're just basically barely making ends meet. 10 grand is not tons, right? It's great, but it's not going to support you for like a year. So, and again, as you said earlier, you don't really have the 10 grand. It's maybe 8 or 7 right after tax. So careful not to spend what's not yours, right?
Yep. Yeah, and actually do the math. So you're right, 10,000, we're just using that as the example. Of course, it could be any number, but it does sound like a huge amount. Well, what does it cost you to live every month? What's your rent, your groceries, and everything else?
Yep.
$10,000 is probably not 10 years.
No,
it's probably a number of months and nothing more.
So don't get too excited about it, right? I mean, it's great that you've got it, but again, you want to sit down and don't do anything, right? Because it's easier to undo when you've done nothing, right? So you haven't committed yourself to anything, and look at what the best mileage for that thing is for your particular circumstances, because everybody's completely different.
Give it pause for 5 minutes, make a plan, and do that.
Don't do anything impulsively with it.
Okay, so final question, and this is a little bit off topic, and I don't want to get into a big technical discussion here, but what happens if you get this bonus while you're bankrupt? Okay, so I mean, our regular listeners will all know that while you're bankrupt, you have to send in copies of your pay stubs to the trustee every month, and if your income gets above a certain level, you got to pay more. And this is all set by the government. Every trustee uses the same rules. This isn't our rule. It's called surplus income. You make more, you got to pay more. So what happens if while you're bankrupt, you get a bonus or a big commission check, some other lump sum of income while you're bankrupt? What happens?
So the bankrupt has a duty to inform the trustee of all income during the bankruptcy from whatever means, whether it's an inheritance, a bonus, whatever. It's income. So we throw that into all of your income over the period of your bankruptcy, and it may be subject to you paying it back to a certain extent or a percentage, because there's a surplus income formula. And so if you're already in a bankruptcy and you're under the level that you're allowed per month so that you're not in a surplus income bankruptcy, and you get a $10,000 bonus, that might put you over the surplus income threshold that the government sets because we average it out. And so that 10,000, which is really only maybe 8, because we're only interested in net income, would be thrown into the mix, and we would divide it out into the number of months in your bankruptcy, and you're either surplus or you're not, which means you're either 9 or 21 months. It just means you're going to pay more. And it's not something that you just get to keep. You have to report it because it's your duty to do so, and then we have to deal with it in the.
Well, and one of the questions that you and I both ask every single person we meet with is, so how does your income work? Are you expecting to get any bonuses? And some people say, no, I'm straight hourly. It doesn't change. Other people will say, we usually get a quarterly bonus or an annual bonus, and I don't know what it's going to be yet. And I probe a little deeper. Well, what could it be? Well, last year it was $5,000. Okay, 5,000 was the check, or 5? No, it was after tax. Okay, so we nail it down, and then we can plug that in and say, well, okay, if you're, you get an extra, $9,000 over 9 months of a bankruptcy, that means your income is $1,000 higher every month. And so instead of being in a first-time bankruptcy where it's only 9 months. If you're over the limit, an extra year gets added, as you said. So,
and surprises aren't good in this business generally. So we try and build that in so that if the person knows they're going to get the bonus, it's part of the income. Like we've already addressed it where it's not coming in later.
Let's take that case then. I come to you and I say, I make this much. I'm around the government limit, but I know that 3 months from now I'm going to get our year-end bonus, and it's going to be a fairly substantial amount of money. So all of a sudden the bankruptcy is not looking so good. What can I do?
So then we would say, does this make more sense now to look at a viable proposal, right? Because if you're going to make that much money, does it make sense to spend, I don't know, $7,000 for the privilege of filing a bankruptcy instead of maybe doing a $12,000 proposal or something like that with a better credit rating and all that stuff? So you try and build this stuff into the discussions right up front so that everybody knows everything possible and all the possible permutations before they sign anything. And then that way, as I said, you don't want a surprise like that. If you know something already, deal with it at the time, right? Make an informed decision.
Yeah, and that's one of the main reasons people do a consumer proposal instead of a bankruptcy. They think things are going to improve in the future, and getting a big commission check, a bonus, is a way of improving.
Exactly.
So by filing a consumer proposal, you're locking in the payment right now. You know exactly what you got to pay.
Creditors can't come back later and ask you for more. We don't measure your income in a proposal. So if you're in that situation, well,
it's a huge
probably
advantage.
Makes sense to do it that way. Yeah,
and you probably feel better doing it anyway, so it makes perfect sense. So, okay, so what is your final advice then to everyone listening here if you either have got a bonus or think you're going to be getting a bonus or any other kind of lump sum of money? What do you tell them?
Pause. Yes, don't do anything impulsively. Put the money in some kind of secure bank, preferably somewhere you don't already owe money. Just keep the money safe somewhere in an institution and sit down and figure out what the best thing to do is. It isn't rocket science, right? You don't have to be a financial expert to make a good move. But be careful what you read and where you read it. Talk to somebody who's in the industry if you can. If you have debts, I would advise you to speak to a trustee. It's free. I mean, we're going to sit down and do just what you and I just did, right? We do this every day. Okay, what do you have for, what do you own? What do you owe? What's your situation? Is the government after you for taxes? Whatever, right? And so you're going to get advice on, for free on what the best move you can make is, because once you make certain moves, you can't undo them. And that is the fear, is that people go down a road, they didn't quite know that they shouldn't do that, and then you've already put yourself in a pickle, and essentially you've blown that money to a certain extent. So pause. Talk to somebody that knows what they're talking about. Don't do anything at first.
Excellent. I think that's a great way to end it. Scott, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Doug.
And I totally agree. There's nothing worse than someone who comes in and says, I got $10,000 a few months ago and I paid off that one thing, but now these other guys are after me. It's like, oh boy, if you'd come in a few months ago, we probably could have used that for everybody.
One thing that everyone you and I have ever met with has said is that I should have come in here 12 months ago or something, because, then those things would not have happened. Right? So
it's easier, like you say, to fix something before you've actually done it. So excellent. Well, thanks very much, Scott. That's our show for today. A full transcript and links to everything we talked about and how you can contact Scott here can be found in the show notes over at hoyes.com. That's HOYES.com. Thanks for listening. Until next week, I'm Doug Hoyes. That was Debt Free in 30.